the hour. So for anyone I have not yet had the pleasure of speaking with, my name is Elizabeth Rotolo. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Graduate Programs for Experienced Professionals, which is the longest job title I've ever had and translates to I have the pleasure of recruiting for our professional MBA program here at Bentley. Today, we are very excited to offer you a sample course of our global management focus area course, which is taught by our fantastic faculty program director, Iris Berdrow. Um, while she needs no introduction, I'm happy to introduce her regardless. Her research spans across cross-border innovation, cross-cultural effectiveness, global alliances, employee competencies, and competency-based education, which is definitely something that is incredibly important in our increasingly globalized world. She's published in the MIT Sloan Management Review, Strategic Management Journal, Long Range Planning, and the Journal of World Business. She has been to 34 countries, and that number just keeps on ticking up. And she is a competitive equestrian. Um, I mentioned full disclosure that I do recruit for a professional MBA program. So for those of you who are new to information about the program, it is a cohort-based, community-focused program for mid-career professionals. We're looking for folks who are ready to accelerate their career. And it is a highly flexible program with a hybrid design. So I won't bore you with all the details now. We'll talk about that more later. But the majority of classes are online with a number of in-person immersion experiences. So it's a pretty exciting, well-built program that focuses on two themes that Bentley has talked to employers, the business community, asking what they are looking for in their next generation leadership. And the two themes that they came back with were emerging technology and sustainability. So looking for folks who have an understanding of the technology landscape, how to use those tools ethically, how to use them efficiently, and also sustainability, both organizational sustainability and environmental sustainability. So thinking both about the longevity of companies, but also how are we being good stewards of our resources all the way through the value chain. Which leads us to our focus area of global management. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Iris to give an example of what a course might look like.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody for being here. It's really exciting to give you a sneak peek into one course within this program. I've been involved in the design of this program right from the beginning, so I'm excited about all aspects of it, but in particular this focus area, which I will be offering and which really encompasses a lot of my professional world and something that I think is really important. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and just make sure that I've got audio on here. And sorry, multiple screens going on here. So Elizabeth, thumbs up, you can see the deck? Okay, super. All right, so I'm going to start out with some audience participation. I'd like to get your input. You all have access to chat. You don't have to come off of your screen, but I'd like to pose a question to you, and that is, what do we mean by culture? And so if you can just, we call this a water chat. If you just type into chat what you think culture means to you. I'll just wait until we get some populated in here. It's not a test. Okay, community norms are North Star. I love that. A way of life, beliefs and practices, the application of values and beliefs. Great. Anybody else? Okay. Well, that's what we're going to focus on. What do we mean by culture? How do we understand it? How do we articulate it in a way that we can work effectively in and with other cultures? That's the entire premise. So if we look at what the definition of culture is, and Geert Hofstede is one of the most prolific researchers in the field of culture, and the one that you most likely have heard about if you've done any readings in culture or taken any courses in this. And he talks about culture as the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from others. And so there's a couple of really important points in this. One is that it is not visible. It's like our software, what helps us understand the world and what helps us function within the world. The other is that it's a group level phenomenon. So while we may talk about the way that one person's behavior might reflect or mirror a cultural value, it's not that we talk about the culture of one person. Our a culturalization process happens in our social setting, in our upbringing, in our experiences, right? And it's through that that we learn how to function within a world. Now, the trick is that it's multi-layered. So we can talk about how an individual's personality matches up with the culture that they represent, or how personalities might vary between people, and then how do we understand the influences on them and then work effectively across those. We can talk about the culture of a team. For instance, Elizabeth mentioned, I'm an equestrian. You know, if you think about the Olympic equestrian teams, the culture, the values of that team are very different than a national basketball team, right? Or a team within your organization. We can talk about organizational boundaries around a culture. So IBM has a very different culture than Apple might, right? We can talk about an industry. The high-tech industry is very different than the construction industry. We can talk about countries, and then we can talk about the globe and humanity as a cultural group. So we focus on the national boundaries, and there's some really specific reasons for this when we talk about culture in terms of global cultures and working effectively in and with other cultures. Because nation boundaries define our legal system, our education system, our languages, our history, our geography to some extent. And so when we talk about culture, we talk about the national grouping of cultures. There are many variations within that, and there are many distinctions between them. But just to orient us, it is to this national level. So I want to give you a quick example. I'm going to show you the trailer of a documentary called The American Factory. And the premise of this documentary is there is an American factory that has closed down, and a Chinese billionaire decides to reopen it. And he hires 2,000 blue-collar Americans. And in the early days, there's a lot of hope and optimism that pretty quickly give way to setbacks and some clashes between the Chinese and the working class Americans. And as you watch this trailer, it's just a couple minutes long, I want you to think about the things that you hear or see that could be sources of conflict between these two national groups, the Chinese who have come in to reopen and run this factory and the Americans that they have hired as the workers. So with any hope, our video will work. Elizabeth, I'm going to thumbs up if you can hear it.
We stand here today with a plant that's closing, but I'm extremely proud of the people that work in this plant here.
For a year and a half, I didn't have anything.
We lost our home, we lost a vehicle.
I have struggled to get back to middle class again.
This is a historic project that is going to help grow this community, give people jobs, and give a future to your kids and my kids.
Where you sit today used to be a General Motors plant, and now there are over 1,000 employees working here.
Is this a union shop?
It is our desire to not be.
他炸玻璃他必在，他什么缺陷什么缺陷。我们的口号：地水行动，土地责任。
We hope someday to get this good.
他动作比较慢，一直雕，一直雕。
美国不能效率低，产出低，不能管了。
There have been 11 complaints filed. Some workers claim unsafe working conditions and unfair treatment.
Doing the same thing over and over again, that wears on your body and your soul.
压力是很大，确实是说白了话，任何人在这个地方。
They told me that they had to be here 2 years, away from their family, no extra pay. I made it their house, they made it my home. We've just bonded.
I'm a riser.
很佩服美国人还能3点半倒，不用像我们想象那样子去为了生活失去很多东西。
那个慢会比工会破坏更厉害。
Now the whole world is watching.
Nothing in America has changed in terms of working people working hard. What changed in America was rich people deciding they wanted to rewrite the rules to take advantage of people.
You never give up on the American dream. To me, that would be un-American.
All right, so maybe I've whet your appetite for what to watch tonight. So originally, first piece of this, Great Hope. Some indications that things may not go as smoothly. At the end, there seems to be some rectification. But if we take that middle part, again, in chat, what did you see or hear that might indicate sources of conflict? Just quick thoughts. What might cause some conflict between the Chinese and the Americans? Maybe shy. Okay, different working cultures, language, way of work, assumptions about work ethics. Yeah, so it's interesting. Brian, distinct work cultures, in order to fix that or get to the end, we need to understand what we mean by cultures, right? And so if we think about work ethic or individualism versus what we would call collectivism, then we can start to say, okay, so if we think about work ethic, what is the value, how much do we put into getting the work right? Individualism, how much is my concern important relative to the concern of my team, the company, the shareholders, right? So we can start, if we have some language to unpack what we mean by culture, then we have something that we can influence, right? This is no different than accounting. If you don't measure it, you can't control it. You can't manage it, right? But what is it that you measure? And with people, this is different, right? It's different than numbers because culture is something in our heads, but we manifest it through the way that we talk, the way that we behave, the decisions that we make, and our appearance, just our appearance, how we move through the world. So, what do we mean by culture? There's a basic principle of the VABNs, values, attitudes, beliefs, norms of behavior. And this is summarized by Lenin Misnevsky, key authors in this field, that culture is a set of deep beliefs and underlying values that are shaped by a group of people to guide that group of people's interactions with each other. And those beliefs and values are taught to successive generations as truths and are often so implicit that group members are unaware of the beliefs and values. And these beliefs and values are manifested in norms and artifacts, norms of behavior and artifacts, the things that we see, right? So what do these things look like? If we think about values, these are the things we believe to be important in our lives, our work and our interaction. For instance, how important is it for me to have a career versus to just earn enough money to support my family, right? And values define for us priorities and guide our decisions. Attitudes are our emotions and beliefs towards a particular thing. I think of attitudes as our compass. We tend to have a common response or orientation to particular issues or events. For example, we have an attitude towards child abuse, clutter in our home, spending money on things we don't really need, and violent movies, right? These are things, as soon as I said them, you had some orientation towards or away from them. Beliefs are what we accept and trust to be true. And beliefs are not necessarily grounded in facts. They can be derived from our perceptions, our experiences, and our line of sight. I'll come back to that in a bit. And finally, we have norms of behavior, which we abbreviate as norms. And these are the ways in which we act and interact. These are habits of behavior that feel familiar and acceptable. For instance, a norm might be that I always smile when I say hello, and I always say hello when I pass someone in the hallway at work. That is not a universally accepted norm of behavior, but it's mine, and it comes from the culture that I was raised in. So now that we have a working definition of culture and understand the characterization of culture as values, attitudes, beliefs, and norms, let's come back to our American factory. We can begin to understand the potential sources of conflict if we can map out the values between the Chinese and American cultures. There are lots of researchers who have created cultural mappings. These are tools that we can use, just as you might have a map of the city of Boston, or you might have a map of the world. You might have a map that allows you to go for a run through the woods. There are different maps for different purposes. Coming back to Hofstede, he's given us a very useful tool in a website that actually compares cultures. And so here I've taken China and the United States, our two protagonists in this documentary. And I just want to, so Hofstede takes these different dimensions. Each map has different dimensions. And I just want to look at the first one, power distance. And power distance speaks to our comfort with hierarchy. And if you want a quick example of this, just take an organization chart of a French company versus an organization chart of an American company and count the number of vice presidents. So China has a much higher ranking of power distance. It's a society that believes that inequalities amongst people are acceptable. This subordinate superior relationship tends to be very polarized, and there's no defense against power abuse by superiors, right? Individuals are influenced by formal authority and sanctions, and are in general optimistic about people's capacity for leadership and initiative. In Chinese culture, on average, in general, people don't really have aspirations beyond their rank. As I said that, and you think about the United States, I'm sure you thought, wow, we're really different. The United States scores low on this dimension, which underscores this American premise of liberty and justice for all. This is also evidenced by the focus on equal rights in all aspects of American society and government. Within American organizations, hierarchy is established for convenience. Superiors are always accessible, and managers really rely on individual employees and teams for their expertise. Both managers and employees expect to be consulted and information shared, right? At the same time, communication's informal, direct, and participative. I just had a meeting here at the university where I was speaking with the provost, with 2 vice presidents, one of the deans, and a collection of other people, and I speak to each of them equally. When I teach in France or in Germany, I would never assume that I could even access the provost or the president of those institutions. My name card here in a classroom just says Iris Berdrow. If I teach in Germany, it's Professor Dr. Berdrow. Nobody would call me by my first name. And these are values that are baked in and that we just take for granted. And the only time that we really recognize our own values is when we travel, because when we travel, we bump into something different. And that's the only time that you really learn, is when you bump into something different. So let me give you another fun example before Elizabeth starts yanking me off the stage here. So just think for a minute, what is this picture? Capture in your mind what the first thing was that came in terms of a word for this. There's some options, right? It could be a rug in a nice home. It could be a souvenir that you brought home. I visited Turkey and brought home a couple of rugs from Turkey, right? They're nice souvenirs. Or it's a place for prayer. Understanding and being able to code switch between these 3 representations is how you work effectively in and with other cultures. Because if you walk into a place where this is on the floor and you don't have the appropriate representation in your mind, you will ruin a relationship. And ruined relationships are very hard to overcome, right? So, what do I bring to my understanding of this world? 3 basic ingredients. The first is what we call cultural knowledge. This is an understanding of cultures and the way in which people may or may not vary in their values, attitudes, beliefs, and norms of behavior. This, takes some time to develop. Next is cultural competence. And this is actually the ability to work with people who are different from us. Here, intercultural effectiveness is a great metric for us, which is one of the tools that I use in my courses. To what degree are we effective in learning about other cultures and applying that learning to new situations? To what degree are we interested in developing and maintaining relationships with people from other cultures? And to what degree are we capable of managing the stresses of being in and with people from other cultures? Lastly, do we have a global mindset? are we oriented towards thinking positively about other cultures and recognizing the benefit of cultural diversity in organizations and work teams? And the question is always raised, can someone learn to be interculturally effective? Can they develop a global mindset? Or are these immutable personality traits that you either have or you don't have? While there's some debate in the literature, there's certainly a lot of knowledge and skills that can be gained through purposeful education and experience. And there's enough known about the benefits of international education programs to know that just going to a new location is insufficient. I liken this to trying to learn finance by walking through a bank, right? You may pick up some tips, but you're unlikely to gain a full understanding of the field or navigate the nuances. So being able to learn the conceptual models of intercultural effectiveness, of global management, taking opportunities to travel, which in the PMBA you will have, you can move along this journey, right? And so the key point is that while you may have traveled, you may have had a great experience, you may be an intercultural person, you may be multicultural, there's always more that you can learn, right? There's more that you can gain. So one last piece that I want to place on this is that as we consider this world around us, we want to pay attention to two things. Our mental models about what represents important data. So what do we look at? And our line of sight, the place from which we see. That place from which we observe dictates what we see. And our place is determined by what we have access to, where we choose to travel, how we choose to travel, what books do we choose to read, what movies do we choose to watch, what courses do we choose to take. So have you ever noticed that you see a lot more detail in your own neighborhood when you're the passenger in the car than when you're driving? You also see much more when you're sitting high in the bus than in a sports car. If you don't travel into the neighborhoods, if you don't move away from your common places, from the tourist sites, you won't see how normal people live. You'll see how tourists live, right? So it's really important to recognize our strengths and shortcomings in observation skills, and to recognize the rules against which we interpret things that we observe, and how quickly we jump to evaluation without really processing what might this look like through a different mental model. So let me give you a quick one last example. Imagine that you are attending a school in India. And while there, your new local friends decide to invite you to a nearby ancient temple. And as you approach the temple, you see rows of shoes outside the entry. And your friends take off their shoes, adding them to the collection. But you hesitate. Your line of sight might be that it's rude to take off your shoes when going into church. The temple is a religious house of worship. Therefore, this leads you to evaluate the behavior as rude. But if you shift your line of sight to align it with what your Indian friends understand, that the spirit rises up through the body starting at the feet, and to take your shoes off eliminates the barrier to the spirit. Therefore, not taking your shoes off would be an insult to the spirits. Same behavior, different interpretation. And a really compelling experience that illustrates this power of the line of sight is astronauts when they first see the Earth from space as a floating blue marble. Each has described this experience as soul shifting, really bringing into perspective all the things we fight wars over. So learning to recognize your own line of sight and being able to shift it to another's line of sight is a useful skill for intercultural work. We call this code shifting. So welcome to the Bentley PMBA. I hope this has sparked some interesting thoughts for you, and truly hope that I see you in class. And at this point, I will pass it back to Elizabeth.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Iris, or Professor Dr. Berdrow in some spaces. I did want to leave a couple minutes here. If anyone had a question about any piece of the presentation, we have Iris here, so I will leave. If there's any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to drop them in the chat. I just want to leave the space while you have the expert here before I go into the rest of my slides.
I had a question.
Please.
I was curious with the map that you showed and how we have these global maps of different cultures. Are there any other maps that might delve into some of those differences across industries?
Absolutely. There's some really great work that's done based on Edward Hall has this idea of time orientation and relationships between people. And he applies that to national culture and to professions. And so what you get is this great mapping of what happens when you get a German marketing person with a Australian accountant, right? And how do you navigate that? Because the German culture has one mapping, marketing has a different mapping. So how did he get into that profession? You know, and you can say the same about the other end of the extreme. And so, yeah, these are applied, as I said, both within industry, within organizations, you know, and then you take that that German marketing person who may be part of BMW and you move him over to Tesla, right?
Yeah.
You can have a lot of fun with it, a lot of fun with it. And the idea behind it is to really unpack ourselves and what we bring to this. In my class, I talk a lot about my experience. I'm an immigrant. And the experience of coming into the US and just, you know, the reason that I keep traveling to different countries is so that I can learn more about myself. Because every time I do, I bump into something where I think, well, that doesn't feel really good to me. So why is that? Right? What am I bringing to this? What screen am I looking at this through? Yeah, it's a great field. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I love that framing of bumping into something uncomfortable not being a bad thing. I think sometimes we can rush to judgment of it's uncomfortable, so it's bad. And the space for reflection is just so powerful. So,
and people have very different reactions to it. There's a lot of research about how people react to that experience. Some lean into it and others run away from it.
For sure. Any other questions for Iris? Going once, going twice. She's not leaving the Zoom room, so if something else pops up, feel free to just unmute or drop it in the chat. I have a couple more slides that I'm hoping you all will indulge me in sharing. So part of the reason that we shared this sample class today was we just think it's an interesting and important topic. And another piece is because it is connected to our global management focus area within the professional MBA. So we know being here in Massachusetts, there's a lot of great business schools to choose from. But we are particularly excited about the curriculum for Bentley's professional MBA. It is broken out into a number of different course types. You can see in the orange column here, we do feature 6 different business essentials. But the real core of the program is the next column over, which is our focus areas. And so these are a chance to do a deep dive. I had mentioned the emerging technology and sustainable practices themes that are interwoven throughout the program. And those are interwoven also within each of these focus areas. Every student picks 4 of the 6 areas. So if you enjoyed this class, you could dedicate a whole semester to working through different global management topics with Iris. The program also features a number of skills workshops and technology labs, and so a chance to get some hands-on experience delivering feedback, thinking about communication for an executive level audience. What is SQL programming, and how can you use that language within your work? And then finally, connected to today's topic is a global business experience. So every student will have a chance to travel. We have two different course options, one in Sweden, one in Brazil at the moment. And so everyone will have a chance to engage in an immersive experience in a different cultural context. On another slide, I'm going to let Iris share a little bit more about the Brazil option. Um, in terms of modalities, I know we have people on the line today from all across the US. And so is this open to people outside of Massachusetts? Yes, it is. So there are a number of different opportunities for connection across the professional MBA. The program runs for 2 years, and across the 2 years, there are 10 on-campus immersion weekends. And so you would be invited to Waltham, Massachusetts to see our lovely campus. And to have a chance to interact with your cohort and with your faculty in person, try out some of the technology on campus, and enjoy some social time together to really build your network. There are a few weeks throughout the semester with their choose your own time weeks or asynchronous weeks where you get to complete portions of the course on your own schedule. So this might be group work, this might be completing assignments, watching videos, participating in discussion boards. But the majority of classwork is in the evenings, so Eastern time zone evenings, Mondays and Thursdays from 6 to 9. They are live classes with your faculty. So folks, we have somebody starting in this year's cohort who's going to be zooming in from Los Angeles. So folks can participate from all over the country and engage in discussions and classes like today's class from whatever space works best for you. And then finally, again, that global travel experience, a 7 to 10 day trip. Iris, would you like to talk a little bit about the Brazil option?
Yes, always. Thanks, Elizabeth. So these travel courses are, they bring curriculum to a travel experience. And the Brazil course is on sustainable ecosystems. And when we think about sustainability, organizational sustainability or environmental sustainability, we're really thinking about how to ensure that the efforts that we take don't restrict options for future generations. And so in Brazil, what we're looking at is basically from end to end of the value chain. And one example that I might pick out is taking essential oils from plants in the rainforest all the way through to developing sustainable packaging for toothbrushes and things like that in hotel rooms, right? So essential oil to a package that is marketed to a hotel chain so that plastics aren't used. And within that, there's all the stages of the value chain of, for instance, the partnerships that takes, the science that it takes. How do you actually work with indigenous communities? How do you do the logistics of moving resources and moving end materials back and forth? And so in this course in the Amazon, we look at all of these stages of that value chain from a sustainability perspective, but within the lungs of the earth, which is just really exciting.
I'm not going to lie, I kind of want to go on that one. Very exciting. So how do you get to join us for these wonderful classes on this wonderful trip? Our application will be opening later this summer. We've tried to make it a fairly simple application process. We don't believe that that should be the barrier, but we will be looking for a resume, a brief essay, a professional recommendation, and your transcripts. As I mentioned before, I am the primary recruiter for this. And so if you have any questions about the process, the program, I'm happy to meet with folks in person via Zoom, just to connect and tell you more. People are often curious then, what does it cost and what comes with that cost? So for folks that are looking at different MBA programs, you'll see some are priced by credit, some are priced by course. Bentley's Professional MBA is an all-in program cost, which includes your books, the courses, food and events during the on-campus weekends. We do have some options for personalized one-on-one coaching. There's the global travel experience. And then we do provide housing and a special event in Boston during our kickoff Ignite weekend in August. The full cost for the program comes to $105,000, which is divided in 5 equal payments across the 5 semesters. That said, there is merit scholarship funding available. And so if you're interested in applying for a priority deadline where that is most available, I hope after this call, you'll reach out to me. For reaching out, again, for folks that are local, I'm happy to meet up for a cup of coffee, invite you to campus and give you a tour. I'm happy to do phone calls or Zoom calls, really whatever's easiest for you. We're trying to make access to information about this program as accessible as humanly possible. And so I'm happy to connect with folks on their calendar. That is it for our formal presentation. So I am going to go ahead and pause the recording in case anyone has questions they don't want recorded.